Welcome, friends. Swagatham. My name is Ian Solomon, and I'm the Vice President for Global Engagement for the University of Chicago. It is my great honor to call to order the Presidential Forum and kick off the UChicago Center in Delhi opening events. This is a momentous occasion for the University of Chicago, and I think also for India. It is wonderful to see so many friends I've gotten to know over the past year from across the university community. Thank you for joining us, and let me also thank those who've joined us from other cities, including Hyde Park and other parts of India and across the world, via the live webcast this evening. We welcome all of you. I will be helping to MC the agenda over this weekend, and we have a wonderful series of events and programs planned to celebrate nearly a century of collaboration and to strengthen the ties for even greater collaboration going forward. I think we are all here tonight because we believe in the great potential for this collaboration to make a positive difference on scholarship, on education, and improving people's lives. Without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming the 13th President of the University of Chicago, President Robert J. Zimmer.
Good evening, and let me add my welcome to this multi-day program that marks the opening and the inauguration of the University of Chicago Center in Delhi. This is a very important event for the University of Chicago because of what it represents about our commitment to academic work in India and with India, and because of how it reflects on the university's thinking about the importance of its global activities more generally. The University of Chicago has a long and deep history and deep connection to India. From the work in India of Suzanne and Lloyd Rudolph, that we will hear more about later this evening, to the work in Chicago in astrophysics and cosmology by the Indian physicist Chanda Kochhar, the University of Chicago scholars have worked in India and come from India. The opening of the center in Delhi today marks a new level of commitment to this engagement. It will be a place where university faculty and students come from across the breadth of the entire university to work with colleagues here in India and beyond to address fundamental problems in their disciplines and fundamental problems of society. This breadth is manifest in 3 central domains of programs that will be running at the center: in science, energy, medicine, and public health, in culture, society, religion, and the arts, and in economics, business, law, and policy. We intend that the center become an intellectual destination for those from Chicago, from India, and indeed from around the world, and that it become a vehicle through which many scholars from India can experience the University of Chicago and, in fact, lead to experiences and opportunities for them in Chicago. The center in Delhi is, in addition, part of a larger context for the university, one in which we are actively addressing our global position as a great research university and what we think being a great research university will entail as the problems that we are addressing become increasingly global in nature and the world in which our students will work becomes increasingly global in nature. Very basic questions. Whether about the world's energy supply and climate change, the deep nature of cultures, their differences, similarities, mutual influences, and multiple manifestations, the functioning of cities in a significantly urbanizing world, or the threat of pandemics. Every one of these problems and many more cannot be understood without deep engagement of a global nature. And so the center in Delhi, together with the centers in Beijing and Paris, is an important step in bringing a much greater global perspective to the university and enhancing our ability to support the work of our faculty and students as they incorporate a global perspective into their own work. Now we'd like to share with you a short video that touches on our aspirations for the center and offers a look at the facility that many of you will see in person tomorrow. Right now we are seeing dramatic transformations in the world around us. We are at a remarkable time in the evolution of India, the evolution of Asia much more generally, so it became very important for us to create opportunities for our faculty and our students to have much more connection to India, much more exposure to India, much more engagement with India.
We can't stay in Hyde Park and ignore what's happening in the rest of the world. You have to be on the ground sometimes to feel what's going on and to think about things that others who have described them have filtered out.
Over the course of the 20th century, we changed and the world changed. Chicago became very, very famous in the 50s and 60s for South Asian studies.
There is this long, strong connection with South Asia and the university. There are over a dozen South Asian languages being taught at Chicago. One of India's greatest scientists, Chandrasekhar, was at the University of Chicago. When the first dinosaur was discovered in India, Paul Sereno was responsible for putting it all together.
Given the amount of interaction we have and work that is emerging from universities in South Asia, it is very important that there can be a way those universities can channel their interactions with the University of Chicago.
The human interactions are really important start for any collaborative work, and having a location will help us get together for brainstorming and collaborating.
The Delhi Center is a destination for University of Chicago students and faculty in South Asia. And as a destination in just 17,500 square feet, the whole university can be there. All departments, all programs, all divisions and professional schools have a space they share, committed to the same fearless inquiry that characterized the University of Chicago. The space was designed so that students and faculty feel right at home.
We see our presence here in India as the opportunity to serve as a catalyst for a real blossoming of new ideas. We'll have faculty members in residence and students working on projects. The lounge space can be used for small meetings, and the classroom is available for conferences, training sessions, certificate programs, and workshops. And the lecture hall is a very good place for panel discussions and conferences.
We're going to have a place where Indian researchers can go and sit and be connected with the University of Chicago.
We can host scholars, we can host conferences, we can bring our faculty, we can bring students.
You focus on your scholarship and your education and let the center help you with all the logistics so your work is more efficient.
I see this as the hub for alumni, a place that we see as home.
The Delhi Center actually becomes the ideal place for the alums to host events, to engage with whatever research needs to be done.
In the life of any academic, there's this split between your research and your institutional commitments. This makes it possible for the two to be integrated.
What the center opens up is the possibility of our faculty running courses in collaboration with Indian faculty and bringing our students and Indian students together. And plus, it also creates a pool of young people interested in the place.
Some of the activity occurs in a classroom within 4 walls, 25 seats, a teacher and students sitting at a table. But it's very important to get the students out of the classroom into the living environment in which this culture is manifested.
Today, 20% of our students are international students. Our faculty have traveled all over the world to do research for over 100 years. The global perspective has been embedded in the university and its very fiber since it started.
By creating this destination and this physical infrastructure, we create a place where the interdisciplinary activity and higher education really rises to a new level of solving the big problems in an important way.
We now turn to the type of program and discussion the center, that the center in Delhi is designed to host. So I'd like to introduce, and after introducing, invite them all to come to the stage together, our distinguished panelists, beginning with our moderator. So we're honored to be joined tonight by Raghuram Rajan, the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and Distinguished Service Professor of Finance, currently on leave from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Governor Rajan is joined by Chanda Kochhar, Managing Director and CEO of ICICI Bank, Randy Kroszner, Norm Bobins Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, Shobhana Bhartia, chairperson and editorial director of the Hindustan Times Company, and Arun Maira of the Planning Commission of the Government of India. You may read more about their many achievements in your programs because for me to introduce them all fully would of course take up the entire time. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. What we're going to try and do is make it more of a conversation. My role here is to keep the conversation going, but unfortunately we have monetary policy on Tuesday, and I'm supposed to be quiet about anything that's related to monetary policy. So I'll hop in on the things that I don't know anything about, but stay away from much of economics, except the really long term. But India is, as you know, going through a period of turmoil, where growth has slowed. We're I think in the process of stabilizing, but there's a lot going on in the economy. And perhaps we can start by talking a little bit about the Indian economy, move on to the global economy and the interactions, and then talk about the big uncertainty that faces us over the next few months, which is elections. And we'll bring in Shobhana at that point to talk a little bit about it. So perhaps we can start with the economy itself. Chanda, what do you see? What do you think is going to happen? What are your worries? What are your hopes?
Well, I think India has always had two drivers of growth: the demographics and opportunity to invest. And while demographics continues to remain our fundamental strength and has the potential even going forward, currently, it's really the investment driver that has slowed down substantially. And the slowdown in the investment driver is not because there are no demands for the produce from the projects that would be set up, but it's really because decision-making in the country has slowed down, approvals are not coming on time, and so on. So I think the big challenge and the requirement, rather, for the economy is to revive the investment driver. But if you look at the past 6 months or so, I think actually some positive steps have been taken. There's a whole lot of, anxiety and acceptance in the form of the government, to start giving some approvals. I think the country's done very good work under the leadership of RBI to actually bring the current account deficit under control, to bring the exchange rate, in stability. The fiscal deficit part is actually now looking much to be within the targets. The export-oriented industries are doing better. So I would say that I think we probably bottomed out as far as the GDP growth is concerned. But each of these factors that are looking good today cannot really revive the economy in a very big way unless we really bring back investments. So I think, the fact that agriculture is so far doing okay, the fact that export-oriented industries have started doing better, will take us for some time. But the big revival in the economy can really come out of reviving investments. And for that, really, there is, focused decision-making environment and a facilitative environment that the country needs to create.
Arun, you've said again and again that jobs are what we need to be focused on. Entrepreneurship, jobs. How do you see that happening over the next few years? What do we need to do, and how do we go about it?
Let me connect with what Chanda just said. Yes, for jobs, we're going to need investments, and we're going to need productive enterprises that will create jobs and attract more investments. And investments are not coming today. And I just want to go to refer to V.S. Naipaul, actually, and he's reflected on India in a rather cynical way, perhaps, and wrote the books which perhaps helped him to get the Nobel Prize also. India, an area of darkness, India, a wounded civilization. Then in the early 1990s, he said, India, a million mutinies now. This release of energy in this country, which has helped us along. But if V.S. Naipaul were to write a book about India today, he'd call it India, a million bottlenecks now. Why are these bottlenecks arising is the question. And because the bottlenecks are coming in our projects, For example, we're not getting investments. It's not a matter of no money available to invest in infrastructure, but people have invested in infrastructure and found that their projects are stuck in power infrastructure, road infrastructure. So you're not drawing in more investments. The same true for manufacturing more recently. Activities are slowing down, they're stuck. So what are the brakes on activity in the country? There is a lot of contention in almost everything. It's just a million mutinies or bottlenecks now in everything. Projects are stuck because stakeholders on the environment side or the land side and the investor, there's no agreement. And our big projects in the East and elsewhere also are stuck for similar reasons. The stakeholders cannot come to an agreement. And we are referring all these misunderstandings, disagreements higher up, and the political system cannot resolve so many things up there which need to be resolved in these places where these bottlenecks are arising. There is at this moment a great mistrust in institutions, and that is really paralyzing the decisions and implementation of decisions. It's all very well to say we announce a big decision, but if people say there was some thing going on behind closed doors and this decision wasn't the right one, someone is gaining out of it, you can't implement it after that. It's stalled. So we are in this position today that we got to improve the way institutions are functioning, the way decisions are being made in a way that is going to be implementable. And so Raghu, you know, and you and I have talked about jobs and labor laws. We are absolutely clear, everybody. The unions are very clear, we need to change the labor laws. The employers are very clear, we need to change the labor laws. We've been saying this for 20 years. But how are we going to change the labor laws? We can't change the labor laws unless we figure out what the change is that is required. And the change is not going to be just merely what one stakeholder wants, it's what several together want. So the process of getting agreements about the things that we know we have to get done is what we got to focus on today. And I would like more and more of us to say, well, let's not keep repeating what needs to be done, but let's figure out how to do it.
So let me get back to the governance issue, and I want to bring Shobhana in on that. But going to, one of the big worries that emerging markets like us have is, of course, what the consequences of Fed tapering are. And Randy, you've been a governor at the Fed. You've spoken a lot about monetary policy. Should we be worried? And what should we do?
Well, I just wanted to say in the U.S., we of course have no disagreements on policy. So everything's very, very calm there in that. So certainly the Federal Reserve is engaged in a process of reducing the pace of expansion. And I think it's very important to understand that the tapering is not a contraction, but it's just reducing the pace of additional asset purchases. So rather than buying $85 billion a month, it's buying $75, $65, $55 billion a month. So the Federal Reserve is still expanding its balance sheet, still providing more liquidity to the system. And the question of the taper is that, well, should we gradually wind this down? Should we slow this pace down and eventually stop the additions? Not actually contract, but stop the additions. And it was quite amazing, I think, to almost everyone involved that when Chairman Bernanke last May mentioned the possibility that in 6 to 9 months the Fed may start to reduce the pace of expansion, it caused such tremors throughout the world. And this shows the importance of Fed monetary policy for the world, but it also reveals some of the fragilities that you were discussing in the different markets. I think some challenges were revealed in countries like India, elsewhere, that had been running relatively high current account deficits, had been running relatively high inflation. And in some sense, it was a warning shot to try to get one's house in order. And here, exactly as you had mentioned, a lot of progress has been made. The current account deficit seems to be moving in the right directions, shrinking rather than growing. Inflation has stabilized rather than getting out of control, and hopefully coming down a bit. And so I think the challenges of Fed policy for the world are not just to say, well, we need to stop what the Fed is doing, because it's going to have an impact on us. It's how do we make our systems more robust so that when changes do come, we can be resilient to those changes. And I think India is an example of how some of those changes have occurred. Is it perfectly resilient? Well, no country is perfectly resilient to these changes. But I think just very gradual pace of change of the Fed's policies led to big impacts. It's possible that in 2015, interest rates may start to rise. There could be some more impacts there. But I think since this has been telegraphed out for so long, hopefully individual countries will have more opportunity to get ready for that and make the systems more resilient to the potential for capital outflows.
Shobhana, I want to pick up on what Arun said, and I'll come back to you, Randy, on how we can think about monetary policy in the global setting a little more. But just on this issue of a million bottlenecks, governance, implementation that Arun talked about. Well, we have a big election coming. Is this the central issue, or what is the central issue in the election? What is it about? What do you think is perturbing the Indian electorate? Are they?
Yeah. You know, I think restoring trust in government fabric, in institutions of governance, is going to be the primary challenge for us. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a lot of that trust getting eroded. Basically, economic or social progress in a country remains largely a political process. And in our case, it hasn't been seen through any bipartisan prisms. It's been going through parliaments, not been functioning. There have been many policy bottlenecks. We've had a plethora of regulators. Every sector has a regulator that's come up. But we don't have a kind of a code of conduct for regulators. So basically, there have been lots and lots of bottlenecks. India is ranked very, very poorly in terms of ease of doing business. So restoring the government credibility, and that can't happen unless you have the elections and you have a fresh government and a fresh mandate, and a government that comes empowered to act and take bona fide decisions, is what is actually going to see the entire economy kickstart. For people to once again restore their faith in the government and to feel that here's the mandate and the government can get down to business. So I think the elections are coming at a very, very critical time, because we have a habit of blaming the external environment for all that's happening. But quite honestly speaking, the external environment hasn't helped. But neither have we helped ourselves, in the sense if we had done what we are doing for the last 6 or 8 months, for the last 3 or 4 years, perhaps things would not have come to such a pass. But we have seen a complete policy paralysis for the last 4 or 5 years during the second tenure of this government. Just one more thing I want to go back to, which you asked Arun about jobs. And we've all been talking about jobs and the importance. But at the end of the day, I come from a firm where we are constantly trying to look for skills. We are constantly trying to look for people, and we can't find them. And yet you hear of millions of engineers, graduates who are all jobless. So where is the link between actually having skilled workers who can get jobs as opposed to having growth which is completely jobless? And I think one of the challenges that we are going to face, and we keep talking about our demographic dividend, but it can actually turn out to be a demographic curse unless we actually skill our people and make sure that they're employable.
So you're talking about matching the skill levels in the economy to the jobs that are available, which could imply everything from training somebody to be a good plumber instead of being an electrical engineer with only moderate skills. But Randy, this issue of governance is not just an Indian issue.
For sure.
This issue of trust is not just an Indian issue. I mean, you've been through a period when the Fed took very many decisions, and you know, there've been substantial accusations since then that they were favoring the banks, and you know, there's a lot of I think discussion going on in the United States about the rescues. But leading on from the rescues, do you think there is an issue of governance there also? And what are the are there any similarities, any commonalities in this distrust of government and regulation?
Sure, and that's why I made the joke when Arun had said about that we have no disagreements in the U.S. that everyone agrees. There's very robust discussion both about the Fed's responses to the crisis. Some people saying it saved us from a repeat of the Great Depression, and other people making accusations about playing favorites. I think it was crucial from my perspective to have done the kinds of support that we did for the economy. And really that came from the work that Milton Friedman, another a great University of Chicago economist, had done with Anna Schwartz in the monetary history of the United States. Because in the early 1930s, the Fed just stood by as the price level was coming down by a third, unemployment was going up to 20%, GDP was collapsing by about 30%, and the Fed just stood by. And Milton Friedman said, the Depression became the Great Depression because of the Fed's inactions. And so clearly we were trying to learn some lessons from Milton Friedman about how not to act. And well, perhaps we didn't do everything perfectly. I think we did prevent the crisis from becoming a full-fledged depression and a worldwide depression. But that said, a lot of very bold actions were taken, and controversial ones, which have raised questions about appropriateness of Fed powers in these areas. And we've had a regulatory reform, the Dodd-Frank Act, which changed some of the Fed's powers. For example, some of the interventions with respect to the markets now require the sign-off of the Secretary of Treasury. That wasn't the case before. We consulted with the Secretary of Treasury, but there was no direct sign-off. Those were powers that the Fed had, no longer have. No longer does the Fed have powers to provide support to individual institutions. They can do support for types of institutions, but not for individual institutions. And obviously, this is a response to some of those concerns. There's a plus and a minus to this, because obviously, one of the reasons for having a central bank is to be able to act quickly as a lender of last resort in difficult situations, rather than go through the whole legislative process that you may have the full-blown crisis before a decision is made. And so I think the Fed has made progress, and the legislative process has made progress on having more transparency, more understanding of the powers that the central bank can have. Some of those powers have been curtailed. We'll see if that's gone too far when the next crisis comes. But this is an active and ongoing debate. And I think the fundamental Fed powers are still there. Some of these on particular interventions have been cut back. I think the Fed moved from being just the front page of the business press to being the front page of the newspaper, and so put it in a different kind of spotlight. And so that's why I think questions of trust, questions of governance have gotten increased attention. But I think for the moment, people are feeling more comfortable with the place that the Fed is and the governance that the Fed has.
Well, there's been a lot of anger at the bankers in the U.S. You think that's justified? Do you think it's gone overboard? And then I want to ask Chanda about some of the concerns about banks here and whether that has also gone overboard.
How could anyone be angry with Chandra? That's impossible. Certainly there's always a desire to find who did it, who's responsible, and sort of point the finger of blame. And I think it's very difficult to come up with the individual scapegoats or individuals who were, if it were only for that person acting differently, we wouldn't have had the situation. The situation was a very broad one. There are many fragilities in the marketplace that broadly supervisors were not fully aware of, and many market participants weren't fully aware of. So it's hard to just say, aha, if only that person hadn't been there, or if that person had their wings clipped, then we wouldn't have had the challenges we had. We had a fragile system. And there are many people to point the finger of blame at. And so I think it's easy to focus on one particular group, and certainly there are many bankers who did do things that weren't certainly in the best interest of the system as a whole, and often, as it turns out, not in their own best interest. But there are many people around the world in many institutions that were taking risks without looking at those risks, not doing sufficient due diligence, not asking questions that could have easily been asked. And so I think there's a natural desire to try to find who was responsible, but I think what we need to do is think about the costs and the benefits of the responses. So certainly there's an anger at bankers and the financial system, but we can't forget that the banking and financial system can also provide benefits. It's a source of credit. It's a source of credit for entrepreneurs. It's a source of credit for infrastructure projects. So big and small, the financial system can provide that. You want to make sure that you have an efficient and stable financial system, but you don't want to go so far to say, well, we can never have any sort of disruptions in that system, because if you make the system so safe, that means that banks and financial institutions can't take any risks, and that means entrepreneurs aren't going to be financed, and that means likely you'd have lower economic growth. So it's difficult to make those trade-offs. I think that's sometimes forgotten in these debates, that there actually are trade-offs in these, that the financial system does provide some very important liquidity and lifeblood for economic growth, and there's a lot of evidence suggesting that, but obviously it can get out of hand also. Getting that trade-off right should be the basis for thinking about proper regulation and governance of the system.
Yeah, I was also hoping you'd say something about those fine papers on political economy that you've written on banking, including one on Glass-Steagall.
Yes, with this man, by the way.
But the fact that after a disaster, you have a lot of vested interests also creeping up to implement policies that they've always believed in, which had nothing to do with the disaster. But let me go to Chanda. Chanda, here in India, we have, especially on the public sector banks and not in the private banks, growing non-performing assets. Hopefully they will stabilize, but it has become somewhat of an issue. Do you think bankers are to blame here? What's going on?
So first, I think let me break this into two parts. One is the lack of trust or the anger that we saw in the US and some of the countries in the 2009-10 period and the reasons for that. And then let me come to, in the second part, the current situation and the concerns around quality of assets. So I would say that, that lack of trust, etc., which happened when the global financial crisis took place in the US, in fact did not happen in India at all against the bankers. And the reasons were twofold. I think one was that while, say, in a country like US, probably the whole, crisis started with, the weakness in the financial system and it impacted the rest of the economy. In India, even while the rest of the economy to some extent got impacted by global movements, the banking sector continued to remain strong and in a way remained like that strong heart which then pumped the blood to the rest of the limbs of the body, so to say, and the economy continued to move. So actually banking became the backbone for the Indian economy at that time. And the other thing was why banking continued to remain strong was because, of course, of all the prudent regulations that were there and have been there in the Indian sector, but also because of the very prudent credit decisioning manner. So while we also saw mortgages in that period growing 30% per annum year on year, but our mortgages were based on the income earning capability of the people and not just on the fact that the value of homes was going up and every year the bankers were lending more and more. So irrespective of whatever happened to the real estate prices, as long as the person continued to have a job and continued to live in the home for which he or she had taken a mortgage, they continued to pay and the quality of assets remained good. So I think, in fact, during that period, it was more actually bankers acting as the backbone for the economy and making sure that the entire economy continued to move irrespective of whatever was happening globally. In the current situation, I think the big concern around banking today is the quality of assets. Now, the issue is, where should the anger lie? We must remember that we're talking of an economy that was just about 8 quarters or so ago growing at 9% per annum. And from there on has sharply adjusted to 4.5% per annum. I think that kind of adjustment has an impact all around on the entire economy and therefore on the quality of assets. The second is that as these assets were being built up and the banks were participating in financing these projects, those were based on certain assumptions. Assumptions that approvals will come on time, assumptions that the power projects will get completed in 30 months, assumptions that even after they are completed, coal would be available and so on. I think a lot of things have happened outside of the control of the bankers that have changed these assumptions. And that's why the quality of those assets is not as good as what was envisaged at that point in time. So I think when today, we look at the concern, we should look at the fact that it's the entire ecosystem that has moved in a direction which was very different from what was thought of, and that's why the assets are where they are. But having said that, I would also say that I think we should not be overly concerned even about the quality of these assets for two reasons. That, even today when you look at the banking assets, the retail side, the consumer side of the assets is continuing to perform in a very stable manner. The loss rates there, irrespective of what happens to the growth rate, is actually very much under control, partly because of the reasons as I mentioned. People have their jobs, people want to pay up their loans, people want to live peacefully in their homes and drive the cars for which they have taken the loans. As far as the large projects are concerned, clearly these projects are not generating the cash flows that they were supposed to generate by now. Projects are complete, but they don't have the raw material, they don't have the connection, the backward linkages, so they're not generating cash flows. Leverage levels have gone up. But at this time, if the bankers hold the hand of the intrinsically viable project, I think these projects will grow out of their problems as the economy grows. So clearly it's not, today we have 20,000 megawatts of power capacity that is not producing power. It's not that if they start producing power, India will not consume power. It's just that today those approvals for mines or those coal linkages are not there. So I think if those issues get sorted out, if it comes back to what I said earlier, decisions start getting made, approvals are given, the cash flows to these projects would come back. So it is the time to handhold, and most, not all, but most of these projects should grow out with the growth in the economy.
So you essentially giving hope and also saying that every bad loan doesn't mean it's an act of corruption or an act of incompetence. It could be just bad luck. And bankers are meant to take risks, and risks sometimes end up going the wrong way. Shobhana, I want to move to a somewhat different issue, which is cultural differences, so to speak. And one of the incidents which brings cultural differences to the fore is the most recent incident of our deputy consul in New York, Devyani Khobragade. The view that you read in the Indian press and the view you saw in the American press or even the British press seemed like they were talking about entirely different incidents. Could you speak to that a little bit and talk about some of these differences and where they may come from?
On this particular case, actually, it's a different story altogether. But I do think that Indians are slightly more sensitive, perhaps, than their European counterparts on issues of privileges, on issues of each one's own rights or standing, because Devyani's case was a classical example. But if you look back and you look at the case when our former president, Abdul Kalam, was frisked, or you look at one of our superstars, Shah Rukh Khan, who was frisked, and to my mind, as a media person, I saw no harm in that, because I think the same treatment has to be meted out to everybody. Of course, you can keep the former president out of the loop, but whether you're a superstar or you're a leading politician or a corporate, I think the law remains the same. But there was quite a hue and cry when a lot of our so-called Indian icons were actually frisked in America, and it was taken up in a big way by the Indian authorities. The press highlighted what had happened because these were celebrities, these were people, and everyone is interested in knowing what's happening to them. But I think it got blown out of proportion in Devyani's case, if I may say so, largely by the diplomatic corps. Because we're all privy to actually what happened post the incident in America, and there was a meeting in the South Bloc, And in that meeting, the line that was being favored was a line which is a lot more moderate in nature. But apparently the entire diplomatic corps sort of got together, felt pretty threatened by this, and felt it leads to a lot of insecurity. And before we knew it, the whole issue had kind of snowballed out of control. The media was not sort of inciting the issue, if I may say so, but was sort of reporting the issue. And it did take on a very disproportionate sort of character, and then became like a stumbling block even in terms of our bilateral relationships. And when the US ambassador was called, and it just snowballed into something larger than it was supposed to be. And I think somewhere along, I think the authorities did realize that it had gone a little too far, perhaps in terms of the posturing or in terms of how the incident had played out.
So you're saying don't leave foreign policy in the hands of the foreign ministry?
I wouldn't say that, but I think because this was one of them. Because when you had the former president, or you had Shah Rukh Khan, or several other things, the reaction was a lot more proportionate. But in this case, because it was a diplomat, I think there was a greater degree of alarm, because I think the issue that confronted her is an issue that confronts a lot of people who are actually posted abroad in terms of their domestic help, in terms of the terms of service that are given to them. So I think it somewhere did become a real issue, and one that was staring at every diplomat.
Arun, do you see this differently? Do you have a...
No, I see something, yes, not differently. As you pointed out and Shobhana confirmed, maybe the people in the two countries saw it differently. But as she said, maybe the more important thing is what were the diplomats doing? That the world has changed. No policymaker is able to shut the world out and take decisions. I know you said that till day after tomorrow you are shut off. But you can't. In today's world, everything you do and say is out there. And what people feel about it is reflected back at you immediately, and you have to respond. In fact, you're anticipating what they would think about what you do, and that is influencing the way you shape policy. So we have to, I think, discover better ways of making policy which carries people along. And it can't be done in an ivory tower and say, well, people will accept it. They will not. So here, when we talked about earlier, the bottlenecks that are coming in the way of the growth of our country, maybe similar in the United States, is lack of trust in institutions. And that lack of trust is being created or aggravated by the openness of everything in the media. So people doubt this, they get a piece of information here, and Twitter and the social media doesn't help, because they give you little pieces and you suddenly get a fire, and then you don't know how to douse that and to get out of it. So building trust, taking decisions which carry people along. These are the two abilities that democracies need to have today. And India needs it more than perhaps the United States, because the agenda is much larger. We have to move much faster. Building trust in institutions. You said yes, that some bankers may have made a mistake, but that's no reason to have mistrust in banking. But yes, but that's what people will say. We don't know what's happening out there. We think maybe all of you are bad. So who's responsible now to build the trust? How do you build that trust? You can't ask the government, please tell the people to trust the bankers. Because then they say, you don't know what's going on, you're in cahoots with them also. So the bankers have to build trust in bankers collectively. How do you do this voluntarily without being regulated? Similarly, we talk of business in our country. It is mistrust, and business is also growing. So what shall we do about it? Should we ask the government and the economists to explain to the people that business is good for them, will create jobs? That's not going to increase trust in business. The business has to directly relate to people and win the trust. So business entities, business associations, bankers as an association, and so have to start communicating in the language of people about things that matter to people, not what we say should matter to you. This seems to matter to you at the moment. The fact that you don't trust us because we've done certain things matters to you. We have to explain this to you in your language, how we won't build the trust. And I say, for us in India, if we don't get ourselves working on this agenda, which, Raghu, if I could put it, economic reforms, financial sector reforms are all on a track one. It's the accelerator of the car, and you put your foot down. But if on the other side, the track 2, the brake is on, you will stall as we are stalling. And the track 2 are reforms to do with institutions, building trust, reforms to do with the ability to take decisions in a democratic setup in which information is available to everybody. So the skill to do this, which I came to earlier saying, stakeholders will have to relate to each other. Going up to someone there, sort it out amongst us is not working. Look, in our country, we've got stuck that because the executive and the experts are not able to come to solutions to healthcare, for example, medicine prices, IPR related to that, people will appeal to the Supreme Court, and they're entitled to do it. Now, the court is not equipped to look at something so systemic, but it's required to do something, and it will say to the executive within 3 months, you shall sort out this problem, or we will do it. The executive keeps applying its present method of doing it, which is not very transparent to people, and they're not included. So it finds a solution and says, we've done it. Within 2 months, that unravels. Back they go, and this time the Supreme Court says, this is the solution, because you can't do it. And then we say, well, why is the judiciary doing the work of the executive? And now we're saying, why is the Election Commission doing the work of the executive? But this is why. If we built the processes of the executive enabling the people to come to the agreements, which then empowers the executive, there's no need to go up to institutions which are not designed to get to agreements on systemic issues. So the ability that we need to build in our country very quickly, and I hope that this is what the next government would do, they will need it at the coalition also, to get agreements among people who are not in the same party. Similarly, many of us are stakeholders with different views, like Labour, as I mentioned. We've got to come to agreements together in our places.
So we'll come back to this issue of strengthening the institutional structure so that you can get broad agreement and decision-making lower down. But I just want to pick up on one sort of offhand remark you made about social media, that it was disruptive. Do you agree, Shobhana? Disruptive, good, bad? How do you think about social media?
I think it's democratized the media completely. I wouldn't want to put it in either bucket and call it good or bad, but it's a reality and it can't be wished away, and it makes everything real time. So I think this whole information technology has completely changed the way in which we govern the country, because now no news can be suppressed, everything is available, and even the conventional media, which is bulk of our offering, we also have the social media. A lot of the feeds we get are directly from the social media, are from people firsthand telling you what's happening, even before you can rush your cameraman there, or you can rush your own reporters there. So the social media is here to stay, and the social media does capture the basic trend. It may at times get exaggerated, but it does capture the essence of what's happening. And therefore, I think it can be also used as a very powerful tool, as a very powerful vehicle, if the government or the policymakers so desire.
But this issue of trust, yeah, sorry.
I want to link that, if policymakers so desire. So we have been looking at it. It's a phenomenon. You can't wish it away. I mean, people are trying to wish it away, but you can't wish it away. It's there. Everybody can use it. As they say, well, the terrorists can use the same, and you can use the same against them, and it's escalating the use of this media by both sides. What is capable of, let's look at it inherently. The social media puts things into small fragments, billions of pieces. What's the sense that you make out of it? It's very difficult to make a sense which lasts for a long time out of it. What we are finding is that social media, well, let me put it this way. The social media got the Arab Spring going. Yeah, it's good for raising people's passions and getting a moment to stall something, to stop something. But you can't, as someone wrote, you can't tweet a constitution. You've got to sit down and deliberate thoughtfully over time, or a few days at least, and say, what's the narrative here? And this is not by interrupted tweets. So as we also in the Planning Commission used social media to help us to make the plan, really we found it doesn't help, not to get the narrative of what you want. I mean, you get a lot of opinions and stray things and so on. But you can rally a lot of people around to stop something, and we do it very well in India also.
But you can get feedback on that. I mean, the social media cannot construct the constitution for you, but it can be used to disseminate the constitution and get the feedback directly from the people, bypassing so many channels.
How do you find social media, Chanda, in your business?
So in fact, we've been seeing that the way technology and adoption to technology has evolved amongst the Indian consumers, it's really been waves, and I think social media is the current wave, which is a reality. So there was a time where we thought ATMs were a novelty when we installed ATMs in the country. 50% of our transactions moved to the ATMs. Then there was the time when call centers, mobile banking, and so on, actually grew. Today, it's internet on the move. Everybody wants to do everything on their phone, whatever they could have done sitting in their home on the internet, and it's social media. So, again, I think it's a reality. It's something that we have to work with, and the question is, can it be good or bad? Depends on how you put it to use. So today, we have people on social media who actually write there saying, there's a fire emanating from one of your branches. Even before we get to know about it, there is social media that is telling you that. Now, the question is, do you have the capability to be online in a way, be responsive to that data and react positively? I think it has a huge positive impact. But if you don't have the possibility of reacting to that data very quickly, then it can degenerate into, because somebody can go there and write a complaint, and if you are not able to sort it out, then it creates a huge reputation risk. So I think the way we use it is that we actually look at it as a very positive method of feedback. And something that keeps us alive to the situation, whether it's in terms of customer service, it's in terms of customer feedback, it's what's happening. And consciously, we need to build response mechanisms to be able to react to everything that is coming out of social media. The other thing that I would say is that, in fact, we've had a very positive experience by being a little proactive and building banking possibilities around social media. So what we saw is when everybody is on Facebook, and I think there are a lot of banks that have this capability that you be on your Facebook and you can view your banking accounts and so on and so forth. What we did was we went ahead and we actually said, while you're on Facebook, you can even complete your payments, and you don't need to get out of your social network to even completing your payments. So you're sitting, you're chatting with your friends, you are going and booking a movie ticket, you pay for the ticket, but while being within Facebook, you share your experiences across the ICICI Bank account. Now, Facebook tells us this is the first bank in the world who's done it, but I think it's something, an experience that the customers, that the youth of today is really enjoying. So I think it's a reality, and there are many possibilities of actually using it positively.
Do you tweet?
I don't, but I actually follow everything on Facebook.
Okay.
So.
Do you tweet?
Well, I have an account so I can follow others' tweets, and I can read all the tweets.
Arun?
No, I tried it, but I've given it up.
You've given it up.
No, I've not given it up. I've consciously been told by my bank that I should not tweet, because the moment I start tweeting, it'll become unmanageable for me. So it's a conscious.
Randy?
That's how the Federal Reserve communicates monetary policy these days.
Oh.
No, I don't tweet.
You don't tweet. I have a few fake tweet accounts going. People pretending to be me.
No, exactly. That's some of the dangers of social media, because it becomes difficult to check the source. So the positive is that you get this immediacy. The difficulty is that sometimes it's not well-founded, and then you have to send the reporters there to find out that, or send the firefighters to find out there isn't a fire, or find out there isn't a story there. So there's a bit of a trade-off.
So Randy, I want to come to an issue which we talked a little bit about earlier, jobs. And this is a big issue in the United States.
For sure.
Now, of course, it's an issue now with high levels of unemployment, but it's an issue more broadly for industrial countries, with all this talk about automation, about the middle class being pushed out of the comfortable jobs, of there being jobs as gardeners and McDonald's clerks, and jobs as high-flying executives, but nothing in the middle. In fact, Mark Andreessen talks about the day when software rules the world, and essentially the software programmers will get all the rents and nobody else. Do you think that's a future which we're going towards? Not to that extreme, but is it a winner-take-all society? And if so, what social changes, what economic changes do you visualize? And how do you deal with the conflicts that inequality creates?
Wow, that's a very big set of questions, and so I wish I had just a quick tweet to be able to answer them. It's no surprise that a software engineer might think that software engineers will rule the world, as a great University of Chicago economist once said that if plumbers ruled the world, or if plumbers were architects, every room would be a bathroom, because you would do what you know best. And I think there's enormous change that's going on and potential skill mismatches. And we're certainly seeing that in the US. The labor force participation rate is quite low. A lot of workers are becoming discouraged, and part of that is because there's a bit of a mismatch between the skills that they have and the skills that are needed. For example, that in the past it used to be more that there would be sort of prime-age males who had relatively low skill set would move back and forth between manufacturing and construction, because you really needed physical strength to be able to do that. You still need that in construction, but in manufacturing, at least in the US, it's all automated. So those jobs aren't there. And so we've seen lower labor force participation and lower job finding for some prime-aged males. What we've been seeing is that older workers are actually participating more in the labor market, again, because of some of these changes. So there are more service sector jobs and retail type jobs where you don't need physical strength and physical stamina. And so you can be in your 60s, 70s, or even 80s and still be able to be very productive in these jobs. So some of it is negative and some of it is positive. So it's good that in an aging society we're generating more of those kinds of jobs. But there is this potential hollowing out in the middle. We're seeing this, as you said, not only in the US, but in other countries. And I think what it points to is that we need some both shorter-term and longer-term solutions. The longer-term solution is obviously education and building people's skill sets so that they can match the needs in the economy as we move forward. In the intermediate run, however, it's very difficult to be able to provide those skills to a set of workers who may not be that easy to retrain in these other areas. And so I think that's why you're seeing these pockets of persistently high unemployment in the US, and that's going to be problematic. And I think that's why you sometimes see some of the anger in some of the parts of the US and elsewhere, because people are very frustrated. In the past, they've always been able to move back and forth to different types of employment. It's more difficult to do that now, and that potentially is disruptive going forward.
So is redistribution a temporary answer?
Well, certainly providing support for displaced workers is, I think, virtually every country does. We extended unemployment benefits very significantly in the US to help people to move. But I think that's only a partial solution. You really have to make sure that people move on to other things and get a sense of self-worth. So it's not just making sure that the income is there. I think that's very important, but also make sure that people feel that they are productively contributing and want to productively contribute, because otherwise it can lead to sort of political disruption and disgruntlement.
But do you believe these views that the rents are all going to go to a very few, even if people have education, etc.? It's going to go to a very few, and the rest of us are going to be without jobs and looking around, and while the machines do the work and the software engineers collect all the rents.
Well, certainly there were those kinds of discussions back when we had innovations. The first rounds of mechanization was exactly the same kind of thing. The Luddites were exactly talking about the same thing. It's the machines that are taking the jobs away from us, and we'll never be able to produce enough jobs. Well, that was a few hundred years ago, and so I think we've produced a heck of a lot of jobs since then. And so I think we can deal with this, much as we've done over the last few centuries, to be able to deal with some of this fundamental change. But I think education is going to be crucial. I mean, this is one of the exciting things about opening the center here, in working between the University of Chicago and India to try to improve education, to try to think about what are the skills that are needed and see the ways to produce that. And you were just talking about social media and technology. Obviously, that's something that has a lot of potential for providing a lot of information and training to people wherever they might be and at much lower cost than in the past. So I think there may be challenges now, but that's also a spur to innovation, and there's a lot of experimentation. I don't think we're there yet, but I think there's a lot of potential.
So I hear you also saying that rereading economic history is a good thing, because you see the insoluble problems of the past are the insoluble problems of the present. And
Yes.
we found solutions then.
Yes, yeah, we didn't all starve as Malthus said we would.
Right. Arun, we have, we've talked about this earlier in the conversation, this problem of jobs, of skills, of inequality in India also. Where do you think that's going? Do you see social conflict emerging from it? We haven't had social conflict, at least to the extent that people would predict with the levels of poverty that we have in this country. How do you see this going forward?
Well, first thing is inclusion in growth. As I said, there are probably two approaches to inclusion. One is that to those who have not yet been included, you give them something from those who have got something, redistribution. Handouts to compensate and give people the things they need, which they can't earn, buy from their own earnings. The other way of inclusion is to get jobs, that people have incomes and livelihoods, then they can afford these things there. So our focus has to be on the latter as a model of inclusion. Now, in the last few years, this is the struggle we've had. There's been, for the last 10 years perhaps, so much of an emphasis on the handouts and the subsidies and the rights as a way to inclusion, and yes, you do need it, but that becomes unsustainable for the economy, and that's what we found. So the other is, let's emphasize livelihoods and jobs. Now, jobs are not merely by skilling somebody. We have situations even now, people who are very skilled, but don't get the job that is appropriate to their skills, so they go and do something else. So it's the generation of enterprises which will employ people, and those enterprises must inform what is required, and the enterprises must also do the skilling, because that's where you hone up the skill really. So this is another shift in our country that we need to make, that the skilling is the job of the enterprise also. The government supports it, but the government can't do it offline and provide to you the skilled persons that you otherwise say that you're not getting. Germany does this very well, for example, and that's become, as we hear, the principal German export to the US and elsewhere is the vocational training system, and to us too. So get the enterprise as the focus. And the enterprise needs skilled people, must recognize that the skilled people are its assets. What is coming in the way of growing enterprise in the country? All our surveys of small enterprises across our country, and the big ones too, say that the business regulatory environment is the biggest impediment. Especially the small enterprises are tangled up completely in knots. And the owner has to spend the time to go and get the forms done and to deal with the inspector rather than managing the business. How are we going to improve the business regulatory environment in the country? Well, it turns out that we are fortunately, like the US, a federal country. Fortunately, why? Because then you have the possibility of experiments happening, improvements happening in different states, which others can learn from. 2/3 of the regulations that affect manufacturing companies are state regulations, and even the remaining 1/3 central are administered by the state. So if you want to improve the business regulatory environment fast and much, focus on the states rather than asking the center. Focus on the states. And fortunately, we are in a position in our country, we've got different political configurations in the states competing. That's also a good thing. So what we are doing is to bring to the states an evaluation of their business regulatory environment from the perspective of industries in the states, and we started doing this last month, and we'll do it every year. And then assisting the states to get the regulations tuned up, and in the tuning up of the regulations, to get the stakeholders to agree on what is the change is critical. And we found that there are methods that are being used in different countries, Korea, Germany, now being introduced in the OECD countries more generally, of getting stakeholders to work together to tune up a regulation. So provide this method to the states. So we hope that way, that first biggest impediment that people have, the enterprises have, will go. The second one is related to people, skills. And here, as I said, it has to be a partnership between the labor and the employer to build the skills of the labor also. And the government system then supporting, especially for small enterprises, that which every small enterprise can't do by itself and could be done offline, like the theoretical part perhaps of some expensive machines to be done around. So this is a partnership between enterprises and labor and by the government. And again, we are finding in some clusters and pockets it's working well here. In other countries, of course, have done it very well. So to bring this, so the emphasis is not, Raghu, and this is why I say with you, it's not the labor law itself. It's the process of building the enterprise along with the skills, and then say what is the change in the law required to support this process. Number 3 is the physical infrastructure. But there again, the bottlenecks, as we say, are to do with not in manufacturing, but the inability of the system to get the people to come to an agreement. And then we keep referring these things way up there, and then we have a committee which tries to resolve these bottlenecks long after they have arisen. And then you got to go back anyway to have the solutions implemented on the ground, and people must accept the solution also. So those are the 3 principal ones, but let me say a 4th one. It's about convergence. You know, this is related to industrial policy. Convergence amongst the policies being proposed by various ministries is confounding the heck out of, the lack of convergence of industries. You talk about the defense arena, right? And you talk about, well, electronics hardware, so many. Some who say this is what the policy should be, and the others, the ministries, that from my brief, the policy can only be that. And industry is struggling. And foreign investors also say, what is your policy here? So convergence there too.
Chanda, inclusion. Finance plays a role here. What's your sense of what you find most exciting about the things you see in your bank and outside in terms of movement forward on inclusion?
I think there's a lot of movement taking place on financial inclusion. In fact, the country as a whole, we are making a whole lot of changes since the last couple of years on financial inclusion compared to whatever was done in the so many years in the past. The reason I think is a lot of enabling factors, so to say, have now come into play. A lot of changes happened on the regulatory side, allowing the banks to actually use correspondents who could take your reach to the interiors and make banking happen. A big enabler, of course, is the use of technology. The evolution in technology, the evolution in telephony, the telephone connectivity and so on, which enables a lot of banking that can be done through the use of that. But the way we look at inclusion is that you make banking take place for the unbanked, but look at it as a multi-channel and a multi-product approach. So when you look at inclusion, inclusion does not only mean that you open a bank account for an individual, but the moment you open a bank account, can you enable remittance to take place? All the government subsidies that have to come, can they come in directly into the banking system? All the money that a person has to send for sustenance of his family throughout India, can that be done through very, very easy technology-based instruments and mobile telephony and so on? So you open savings bank accounts, you enable remittances to take place, you actually give some very small micro investment products and of course microcredit. So give them credit so that they become self-sustaining in that sense to start earning and give them earning capability. The second is that while you're doing all this, you really have to find innovative ways of doing it. So you cannot just do it through very large structural branches, but use all the forms of technology so that you bring down the cost per transaction and you make this whole thing viable. So we've seen that we have today, opened branches in those smallest of villages where there was no bank branch at all so far. But the way those people have responded to the presence of banking facilities there and the way it's transformed the lives of people, we've seen that some places we feel even opening that small branch by itself is not viable. So we have what we call mobile branches. So the branches that move on a mobile van. A mobile van is entirely self-equipped, online connected with the back-end systems of a bank, and that mobile van moves through 3 villages in a day. So in a way, it's 1/3 of a branch for a village, but takes care of 3 villages in a day, and there's huge response. So you have to look at multi-product, you have to look at multi-channel, but you have to continue to innovate to bring down the cost so that this becomes viable. There's another thing that I would, of course, say on inclusion is that while I think financial inclusion is really very important to enable people to participate in economic growth, but again, financial inclusion by itself cannot do magic. Growth has to be made inclusive by other aspects working as well. So, the basic health, the basic education, the basic skill development has all to be there. So if a child is malnourished and cannot grow up to be a healthy individual, then doesn't matter if you were ready to provide microcredit when the person became 20 years or 21 years. Similarly, is the person educated? Did you provide that basic skill training so that the person is employable? So I think financial inclusion works as an important backbone, but inclusive growth comes by making sure that the entire ecosystem becomes inclusive.
It's the lubricant, not the engine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't end the question or the panel discussion without asking a panel which has two of the most successful and powerful women in business in India. How do you see the role of women? I mean, on the one hand, we have the unfortunate and tragic rape that took place in Delhi, and the consequent discussion of the kinds of harassment that women are subject to. But at the same time, we have women at the head of the most powerful banks in India, the State Bank of India, ICICI, powerful editors. Where do you see, how does this fit together?
I think there is a lot of disparity. Many indicators, India is better off. So if you look at the number of CEOs in some of the Indian companies, it's better than the Fortune 500 list. If I look at my space, which is a media space, and I look at the international organizations and the number of women who are at the helm of affairs, again, India doesn't fare too badly. But having said that, I don't think it's about women holding these positions, because we only a fraction of the women. I think the basic issues really which cause us concern is, the social infrastructure, it's health and education, where I feel women still have a long way to go. So whether it's the maternal mortality rate, whether it's malnourished children which come out of mothers who are not healthy, whether it's the infant mortality which again comes out of the mother's health, or whether it's education for the girl child, where you see the parameters are far better for a male child than they are for a girl child. There are many indicators where women's health are concerned and education are concerned, where women still have a long way to go. And unless we actually have a healthy, educated population, they can't even participate in the economic process until they know their rights. So there is a huge disparity, and I think people that you see around are really a very small fraction of the larger agenda that we are trying to deal with.
Okay, we have about 13.5 minutes, so it's important that the audience join in the discussion. The University of Chicago is always about free and wide speech. So maybe we can take some questions from the audience. Please feel free to ask any member of the panel, and remember the moderator can't answer any questions.
And we do have some microphones that can come to you, so I think the way we'll do this is if you'd like to ask a question, and we do ask that it be a question, that it be brief, you raise your hand. If I call on you, a student or a volunteer with a microphone will bring one to you, and we'd ask you to stand, identify yourself, and ask a question. So I see an individual here with a gold tie.
Krishnamurthy Subramanian from the Indian School of Business. My question is to Shobhana, and because it's election time, what I want to know from her is we've had a political formation that has made corruption an issue and has been calling, everybody, let's say, in business and government a thief. Why haven't we had a political formation which essentially goes to the worker in the unorganized sector and tells him that these draconian labor laws that we have are essentially helping those who have a job and are hurting those who do not have a job? Why don't we have a political formation which goes and tells them that these subsidies are basically morsels that you're getting, and the real, the real rents are basically being taken by people who are, benefiting from the current political formation? Why haven't we had a political party that goes and raises these issues?
I think what might make sense is to take a few questions, and then we can turn it back to the panel. So I see another question in the back there, the young woman in the back on the right-hand side.
This is for Mr. Solomon. I just wanted to know, will Professor Donegar be visiting us at the center in India?
And one more question I see in the middle there.
Salil Pandey, Chicago booth, class of 2000. My question is about the will, not the skill. I have been in India for almost 2 years now and have been involved in some bit of skill development. And what I'm finding is that skill is probably not as big an issue as the will is. So I would like some highlight on that.
Anybody wants to answer?
Yeah, I'll take the question about why isn't any political party. Actually, we've believed in inclusive growth for the last many years, which perhaps is the right way to go. But these entitlements, the inclusive growth is coming through entitlements as opposed to growth. And I think therein lies one of the issues, which is a more sustainable way to go down, which is a more inclusive way. And that's one reason why you see these handouts happening, you see jobless growth happening, you don't see political parties actually targeting the labor laws, actually changing the labor laws, because the growth that you also see is happening in the much larger enterprises, which are basically banking on automation. Unless you revive the small and medium enterprise, you're not going to see a huge upliftment of labor, you're not going to see people getting employment. And the labor laws are so archaic. The labor laws, the judicial reforms, these are all reforms which have been actually, commissions have been set up, commissions have brought out papers, but they need to be actually now implemented, and the implementation is being held up, even though several commissions have given their recommendations on labor reforms, on judicial reforms. I think somewhere you need a stronger political will to be able to deviate from the normally chosen path and to say that I'm going to undertake these reforms. Typically, something like this happens when a new government actually comes in. But towards the last few years of a government, I think none of them have really had the political strength to make that leap of judgment, even though there may be a lot of conviction when you talk to them individually. But I think as you have, as you get closer to the run-up to the elections, I think any change in the labor laws, any change in some of these becomes something which is politically very sensitive, and therefore you have people trying to sort of taking a very short-term view and not addressing it. But in the long term, you're absolutely right. It's actually leading to more joblessness. People don't want to employ labor. People don't want labor-intensive industries. People are not setting up labor-intensive industries. But it is a short-term view, but it is a view dictated fully by just politics.
I'll leave it to President Zimmer to answer the question of who might be visiting from the University of Chicago. So I'll look for that one. But on will and skill, I think that's right. We're seeing labor force participation being low, not just because of skill mismatch, that's some of it, but there's sort of a broader discouragement. And you have to make sure that the jobs that are being generated are ones that people are interested and engaged in. As I'd mentioned before, it's something that it's very important not just to have a job, but also have a sense of self-worth and be engaged in a productive activity that you think is valuable to have. So I think there has to be the will to be engaged and to be looking for work and be engaged in the labor market. And because of some of the shocks that we've seen over the last few years and because of some of the dislocations, we have seen some discouragement and a little bit of lack of will. So it's a combination of both will and skill.
Can I just come in? I think this question that you asked illustrates something which I think we are here in this nice hall, and we need to understand the country, as it were, and what really goes on. And you're from Indian School of Business, and so we can talk. I got myself quite educated on what are the real issues of small enterprises and the people who work in small enterprises, as well as what are the demands of the unions with respect to changing the situation. Let's start with the unions first. I found in the discussions as we got the unions along with the employers, the unions were talking not about their union members at all, who earn very high wages. They were saying that in your same enterprises, you've got 60, 70% of the persons who get 1/6 the wage of the regular guys and do the same work, and we've been doing it for some years. This can't be a good condition for a healthy industrial relations and a productive enterprise. They are talking, if I could say, about the productivity of the whole enterprise and the people who are not their members. And they said, this I heard them say to this, that you are making it very easy for us in some ways by just trying to bribe us by giving more wages for those. But we are constantly talking about the rest. And if the country has to grow, you better take care of the rest. Okay, so that's one. Going to the small enterprises, it's not labor laws there. They want safe working conditions. They want fair treatment. Okay, there. So changing the labor laws with respect to what we say, the flexibility to hire even more people on contract is not going to improve the lot of these people at all. So we got to come down into these issues together and understand that people have needs, and they're genuine needs. How are we going to find a solution which will be accepted and will solve the real problem? So I come back to saying, Raghu, that the ability in our country to sit down and talk with each other and listen to each other and say, okay, we are going to agree to do this because we will get support. And that's good for everybody, is the key.
One more question. Okay, I think we take one more question. There on the left.
I'm Renee Bijlani, MBA, Chicago 2001. While the U.S. stock markets are on nominal terms are hitting record highs, the emerging markets are pulling back, but India seems to be doing pretty well. Can you, at least outperformance in the emerging markets, can you comment on what you see from here and how, and why that is and if that continues?
I think today the Indian stock market is anticipating the turnaround that the economy can see post a stable government and the run-up in the economy. So in a way it comes back to saying that we all believe that fundamentally there are strengths to Indian economy and there are growth drivers for the Indian economy. How fast do we work hard on those growth drivers and make them tick and take the economy back to its potential of 8 or 9%? I guess it's everybody's timing of the rate at how fast can we get there. So some people who are actually implementing projects are probably not seeing the same pace of economic recovery as the markets are. So maybe they are kind of a little ahead, of something that everybody is seeing, but they are seeing it a little earlier. But I would actually, come back to the fact that, there is, in a way we are saying that therefore there are flows happening still in the Indian stock market. And why are they happening? Going back to the question of if there's tightening globally, what would happen to the Indian economy? I actually believe that whatever happens to the global liquidity, finally the solution for India in terms of capital flows and therefore the stock markets lies really in what we do to the domestic growth. Because there was a time when US was struggling to grow at 1% and India was growing at 9%. And obviously there was a lot of capital flows coming into the market. Today, if we perpetuate a situation where US could grow at 3% and suppose India grows nothing beyond 4.5%, you will always find less money coming in. So I think if we actually bring in an environment where we have more clarity around policies and where we bring economic growth back, we would still find capital flows coming in, even if the asset purchases go down a little bit. But if we continue to create lack of clarity about investment climate, and we do not really have new investments taking place, and the growth remains laggard, then you will actually have people or investors who have money but who would wait on the sidelines and not really bring in much money into the country. So I think for us, while we can keep worrying, and obviously we have to look at everything that happens globally, but the biggest action that we need to take is on our own domestic economy.
Great. I did have one question directed at me, and what I will say is that I know better than to try to predict the activities or research or scholarship of University of Chicago faculty. They will do what they do, where they do it, and when they do it. And I think what I have learned, though, is that they often do it in a spirit of critical inquiry and in collaboration. I think we've seen some of that here tonight. Let me now invite President Zimmer to say a final word.
I just want to thank the panel for a wonderful and fascinating discussion. I also want to invite all of you to dinner as the evening continues. So please stay with us and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.